In a perfect world, I would attempt to actually finish every single visual novel I've started reading, especially if I bought it. However, I'm a working, grown-ass adult, so between a decreasing lack of free time and a decreasing amount of patience for things I don't like in fiction, I unfortunately have to drop many pieces of fiction, even within visual novels, my favorite medium. So in this video, I will talk about 10 visual novels I was looking forward to, but sadly dropped. Starting off with Sugar Style, developed by SME. This is a very unfortunate case, as not only is SME one of my top favorite comedy moe companies, but the setting was actually fully taking place in university, something that's incredibly rare in any visual novel, most of which are still married to having characters be high school age because of the Japanese simming for their golden years, quote unquote. You would think this would be the perfect combination of aspects to be potentially one of my favorite slice-of-life visual novels, especially since I already like Futuraba, Making Lovers, and Harem Kingdom quite a lot. However, Sugar Style just has some really strange, out-of-character blunders. For one, I found that the 4 main heroines as a whole weren't that interesting. Usually I at least found something to like even within my least favorite heroines in previous SME games. For example, even though I think Himari from Futuraba was my least favorite, I did think the childhood friend bond she had was kinda interesting. While I'm not super into Reina from Making Lovers, she at least had insecurities related to her being an idol and wanting a family. In Sugar Style, I found 3 out of the 4 heroines just straight up really boring. The only one I actually kind of liked was Kaname, who was admittedly kind of refreshing as she's a very snarky troll, being able to turn the usual SME perverted protagonist jokes against him in an amusing way. Sugar Style also has this really weird route system where you can occasionally pick out what part-time job you want to do, but ultimately doesn't really do much. But what's the real killer of Sugar Style for me was the humor. At least to me, SME's greatest advantage is how they mix unique over-the-top humor with wholesome romance. However, I found that Sugar Style was a lot less funny than their usual works. In fact, I noticed towards the beginning of the common route, it relied a lot on these stupid accidental pervert moments like walking to a girl into a bath, which is incredibly rare in SME visual novels to begin with. I don't know why SME had a brain fart and thought this generic type of humor was good to bring back, but even then, when they were doing their typical over-the-top stuff, it just wasn't as funny. Overall, I was heavily disappointed in Sugar Style and couldn't even finish the common route. Next, we have Sakuranomori Dreamers by Moonstone, which is an interesting case. Moonstone is usually known for moe like Princess Evangel. However, they have a few drama-focused titles, one of which being the first Sakuranomori Dreamers, which got translated by MangaGamer. This is the closest we've had to a pure horror slice-of-life visual novel. It starts off slow with a lot of slice of life being around the protagonist and his childhood friend Madoka just hanging out together and biking together. I actually thought this part was really wholesome. I'm already a sucker for childhood friends in theory, but many of them end up not being that interesting. But the way that the main character and Madoka interact had this natural rapport that is chill without being too comedic or too boring. Even if there were no romantic undertones, I would have liked this relationship a lot since there weren't too many cliches. It just felt very real. Sadly, due to plot reasons, Madoka got written out very early on, and that admittedly was a huge reason why I was bummed out and chose to drop this visual novel. It sucks because the premise of the main character being able to see a bunch of weird supernatural beings and eventually joining a group to fight them was interesting. However, I just liked the childhood friend Madoka that much more than the other heroines introduced, and it just felt wrong to keep going without her. Next, I'm going to be talking about Newton in the Apple Tree, one of the first titles developed by Laplacian, a company known for other titles such as Future Radio and the Artificial Pigeons and Cyanotype Daydream. I was interested in this title because it was the first one that got fully released by the now defunct Soul Press. While I thought the idea of making Isaac Newton a blonde lolly was really stupid, I at least have to give the developer props for at least trying something new, so I gave it a shot. The one aspect I can give about Newton and basically every other Laplacian title I've tried is that they actually have surprisingly decently likable heroines. I wouldn't say any of them are in the running for best heroine ever or anything, but they're certainly better than the average. While I have a little bit more mixed feelings on the lolly version of Isaac Newton, as said, I like basically everyone else just fine, from the quirky childhood friend who loves measuring things, the blonde maid who's in love with potatoes, a busty girl from Japan who somehow made it to Europe, and this crazy mad scientist white hair lolly. The initial intrigue of the main character and his childhood friend getting sent to the past and constantly trying to find a way to get back to the present, while also making sure Newton actually saw the falling apple to make sure gravity as a concept was created, started off pretty fun. However, eventually, once the initial intrigue wore off, I just slowly became less and less interested in the plot. Newton in the Apple Tree has a kind of ladder route structure, and sadly, once I got to the first branch for the childhood friend, I just kind of stopped caring. There were a bunch of plot threads introduced, but many of them were either rushed through or just executed in a way for me to not really care much. The visual novel apparently wasn't that long, at maybe 30 hours tops, but I just sadly couldn't get any more motivation past the first route branch. Next, we're going to go into Study Steady, a visual novel developed by Marmalade. This was actually the first Marmalade visual novel to be translated by Shirvune, with other ones like Primal Heart's Duology and Marshmallow All the Way Home coming later. Study Steady is one of the latest visual novels created by Marmalade, boasting some unique animated sprite art. Previous Marmalade visual novels went for the typical static sprite thing, but with Study Steady, it looked like the company was ready to move forward with their art and going for more modern, unique presentation. Study Steady also has pretty solid character designs, with all 4 heroines sticking out enough. Usually one of Marmalade's strengths is making pretty likable and memorable characters. Even in the Primal Hearts series, I wasn't really a fan of the dueling student council thing, but there were a few heroines that I quite liked, especially Alicia. However, this leads me to the issue I had with Study Steady. All 4 heroines were surprisingly just kinda boring. Since Study Steady had a more typical moige premise with just the protagonist going to school every day and walking into girls and interacting with them on occasion, there ends up being no unique hook compared to previous titles. In Primal Hearts, and especially Marshmallow All the Way Home, they had settings that gave characters additional motivations besides their likable personalities. Instead, in Study Steady, the heroines aren't unlikable, but to me, they all just felt like slight variations of each other, some being more outgoing, some being more shy. It was particularly disappointing to see Marmalade drop the ball on character likability and memorability, which is supposed to be one of their greatest strengths in my opinion. So unfortunately, I ended up having to drop it out of boredom. Next, I'm going to be talking about Clover Daisies Plus, developed by Alcott, and is generally considered one of, if not their best title period. All the main heroines actually have surprisingly interesting backstories, even for what's shown within the first hour or two of the visual novel. I like to call Clover Days a childhood friend dating simulator because everyone, including his 2 non-blood related sisters, essentially just act like variations of childhood friends. They all have pretty nice, diverse personalities and roles, and when you get to know little bits of their past towards the beginning, it actually makes you really interested to see what drama will turn out to be in their routes. However, Clover Daisies has one big issue that sadly is also in basically every other translated Alcott title: the incredibly cliché, old-school, unfunny, perverted comedy. I get that Alcott has been around for a while, but do people seriously still like characters openly talking about their random fetishes and openly talking about attraction to siblings or other weird stuff like that? It's not even particularly original, especially when the girls call the main guy protagonist a pervert for not even doing anything, but then he just straight up agrees with them. This is the one type of otaku-centered humor I never got. Do masochists really like being called this? Next, we have Muv-Luv Photonflowers, which is actually a compilation of various older fandiscs based on the original Muv-Luv trilogy. The only one that interested me was an afterstory to Sumika's route from Muv-Luv Extra. Sumika in the whole trilogy was pretty easily my favorite heroine. Not only did she by far have the greatest chemistry with Takeru, but she took part in some of my favorite emotional moments in Muv-Luv Alternative specifically. I was looking forward to see how they would advance their relationship since the actual romance in her Muv-Luv Extra route was pretty short. Unfortunately, this sequel fandisc route has one of my least favorite romantic melodramas I've seen in fiction to date. Takeru and Sumika literally have a stupid fight over what kind of sauce you use on pork cutlet or tonkatsu. The game tries to make it look like both characters were in the wrong for this argument, but let's be real, Sumika was being incredibly unreasonable, much more in the wrong than Takeru in my opinion. I get that they're both emotional teenagers, but Sumika being incredibly overly sensitive to this for several hours in a row was just really frustrating to deal with. I know people have fights over stupid things in real life, but this is not something I want to read in a fan disc. Feels unnecessary. I've tried so many times to finish it just because I like Sumika in general from previous games, but I just hated the way they made her character turn out in this. Next, we have The Princess, the Stray Cat, and Manners of the Heart, or commonly known as Noratoto, which is a visual novel developed by Harukaze. The start of this visual novel is honestly pretty great, with some really goofy, unique comedy. It starts off with this girl named Patricia from the underworld trying to take over the human world, but failing spectacularly. Her interactions with the main character, especially when she wants to find out what porn magazines are, thinking they're like magic incantations, were really hilarious. But the other main heroines were pretty entertaining as well, including a black-haired childhood friend basically being in denial that she's in love with the main character, but in a funny way and not a generic tsundere way, or how his adopted sister is an atypical kudere weird character with a blunt but caring personality, with the last heroine rounding out the cast with a relatively normal gyaru character who's pretty funny, snarking at all the events that happen. So with all this praise, what made me drop Noratoto? Well, it's quite simple. About halfway through the common route, there's this really stupid twist where the main character accidentally gets turned into an actual cat. I'm guessing this is where part of the name of the visual novel came from, but I thought this twist was both really stupid and really unfunny. Unfortunately, they kept this joke going on for quite a while, including things like an accidental pervert moment when the MC just happens to transform into a human when his childhood friend is in the middle of changing. I thought this part was really stupid and really brought down my motivation to read an otherwise pretty funny visual novel. Next we have Chou Dengeki Stryker, a relatively overlooked title developed by Overdrive, which itself is already an overlooked visual novel developer, especially by the Western VN audience. I actually think the initial premise is actually quite interesting. The main character wanting to be a hero, but through a weird set of circumstances, ends up getting his dream at the cost of some of his memories. This has all the makings of a goofy shonen action story with some fun action scenes towards the beginning. However, it's the slice of life parts that really killed it for me. Right from the beginning, the main character is in a really ghetto apartment that just happens to be next door neighbors with characters that were built up to being some of his antagonists. They did attempt to show these antagonists in a more down-to-earth slice of life, kind of attempting to humanize them. Notice how I kept saying attempted. I think these scenes were just incredibly boring, going on for way too long. However, the other issue I have is the other major characters just aren't really that interesting. The main character, outside his initial plot twist, kind of loses the charm of his personality once he becomes a quote-unquote stoic badass. The only character that kind of interested me was the childhood friend, as there was clearly some romantic tension even when they were kids. However, it just took too long for anything interesting to happen. I got to about chapter 5 or 6 of the con route and I was just super bored. I've tried multiple times to get back into this because this is the only Overdrive visual novel that's translated that I couldn't finish. Sadly, I just couldn't, and eventually gave up. The next visual novel I'm going to be talking about is Hapymaher, developed by Purplesoft. This one is extremely unfortunate because every single other Purplesoft visual novel translated in English, I've at least finished one route each. Purplesoft has become one of my favorite visual novel companies because they're one of the few who continue to have really interesting, unique settings that shake up the usual high school harem formula. Despite Hapymaher being the oldest of the currently translated Purplesoft visual novels, it might actually have the most interesting setting of the bunch, with the main character suffering through lucid dreams. Something that in theory sounds really great and could lead to some potential interesting psychological drama. However, in the several hours that I've attempted to read it, I could just not get that far in the common route. The lucid dream aspect ended up being not as interesting as I'd hoped. The pacing was just a bit too slow for my liking, with a lot of wasted random slice of life, but most importantly, basically every heroine that I had met was not particularly likable. Any of the attempts I tried to get back into Hapymaher, I basically stopped purely because I was not a fan of any of the heroines, including an annoying childhood friend who wakes up the main character every morning, weirdly calculating blonde heroine, and even the white-haired heroine who only appears in the lucid dreams, but just ends up seeming more creepy than interesting. The final visual novel for this video is the 9-9 series, one of the most popular story visual novels ever. It's one of the few episodic series that is quite popular among both moe and story fans alike. It appears to have a mix of mystery and some magic action occasionally. From the little I've read of episode 1, the main girl of that episode, Miyako, seems like a pretty decently nice girl, one that I figured could potentially be a hook for me to get into the series. Sadly, this visual novel was brought down by one character for me, Sora. Apparently this gremlin of a blood-related little sister is one of the most popular characters in the eroge crowd, and at least based on her appearance in episode 1, I don't get it. Even if you take out the controversial broski localization thingy, I just thought she was incredibly annoying. How's a girl this annoying one of the most popular girls in visual novels ever? She's like every annoying little sister character in Japanese fiction, but just happens to do it in a dumb, trolly way instead of an immature, stupid way. I don't get it. Normally, one character shouldn't detract my experience, but when you consider that the main character lives with Sora, so it's likely to see her a lot, and episode 2 is mandatory and is going to be centered all around her, the idea of me having to sit through several hours just to see this annoying girl talk heavily brought down my motivation, which is unfortunate since the visual novel story seemed decent enough otherwise. And there you have it, 10 visual novels I unfortunately dropped, but didn't really want to because I wanted to enjoy them. However, I just simply couldn't get the motivation to finish at least one route in any of them. What were your thoughts on the visual novels I chose, and do you have any visual novels you sadly dropped but wanted to like? Feel free to leave a comment below.